Good morning, everyone. This report is a continuation of Trevor Mendoza's report. So we should be able to repeat speech using three routes. First, there is a repetition route through semantics. Second, there is a lexical repetition route from the input phonological lexicon to the output phonological lexicon. Third, there is a sublexical repetition route from the input phonological buffer to the output phonological buffer that bypasses lexical system altogether. So if both the sublexical and lexical routes are destroyed, then the person will be forced to rely on repetition through the semantic route. So if the semantic route is intact, there will be an imageability effect in repetition, with more imageable words repeated more readily. So if there is also some damage to the semantic route, patients will make semantic errors in repetition. For example, repeating reflection as minor. So this is called deep dysphagia. So if only the lexical repetition route is left intact, then patients will be able to repeat words but not non-words, as non-words do not have a lexical entry. They will not be able to comprehend the words they repeat, as there is no link with semantics, and they will probably have difficulty in understanding and producing speech because of the disruption of semantics. Nor should they show the effects of semantic variables such as imageability in repetition. They might also make lexicalization errors, repeating non-words as close words. Example given, repeating sleep as sleep. So was close to this pattern. He could understand written words but could not understand spoken words. He could, however, repeat spoken words quite well, 80%, but was very poor at non-word repetition, which is 7%. So if only the sublexical repetition route is left intact, patients will be able to repeat both words and non-words, but will have no comprehension of the meaning of the words. One type of transcortical sensory aphasia fits this pattern. So we have the language of short-term memory. The rule short-term memory plays in processes as diverse as speech perception, word repetition, parsing, comprehension, and learning to speak and read has inspired much research on both impaired and unimpaired speakers. So working memory comprises a central executive, which is an attentional system, a visuospatial sketchpad for short-term storage of spatial information, and a phonological loop. So both the central executive and the phonological loop are important in language processing. So the central executive plays an important role in semantic integration and comprehension, while the phonological loop plays a role in phonological processes in language. Next is the short-term verbal memory and lexical processing. Phonological loop comprises a passive phonological store that is linked with speech perception, and an articulatory control process linked with speech production, which can maintain and operate on the contents of the phonological store. So the effectiveness of the phonological loop is measured by auditory short-term memory (ASTM) task. So a reduction in the size of the phonological store as a consequence of brain damage therefore should have consequences for language processing, but the consequences are less dramatic than you might at first suppose. Reduced ASTM capacity should hinder language comprehension because material cannot be stored in the phonological buffer for very long. So patients with impaired ASTM show an effect of word length and repetition. Patients with a repetition disorder show very little impairment in language production and comprehension, but are still impaired at repeating words. So the phonological loop and vocabulary learning. Damage to the phonological loop has surprisingly few consequences for language processing. The main rule for the phonological loop is now thought to be limited to learning new words. Patients with impaired short-term phonological memory find it difficult to learn a new language. So phonological memory is used to sustain novel phonological forms so that they can be built into more permanent representations. Working memory and parsing. So the short-term memory plays some role in integration and maintaining a discourse representation. The extent to which an impairment of STM affects parsing is controversial. So early models of parsing consider the minimization of STM demands to be a primary constraint on parsing. So with the conception of working memory as a phonological loop in central executive, the phonological representations of words are stored in the phonological buffer of the loop. So in the semantic representations of local components of the discourse are stored in the central executive. The central executive might play a role in parsing. So in computing parsing processes and storing intermediate results for computation. Lastly, we have the evaluation of work on language and memory. So experimental and neuropsychological research points to the integrity of the language and memory systems. The phonological loop is the phonological buffer of language processing, hence disruption to language and the psychology of language short-term memory are intimately related. Auditory short-term memory is therefore involved in many linguistic tasks. So the contents of the phonological stores are those items in long-term representations that have become highly activated. Indeed, all levels of linguistic processing may correspond to components of working memory. So this is the multiple capacities idea. Evidence supporting it comes from neuropsychological studies that show that some spine-reduced patients are worse at tasks involving semantic information than phonological information, whereas other patients show the reverse pattern. Parsing does not seem to involve working memory, although the processes of semantic integration do involve the central executive. So language research is revealing about the structure of working memory. In particular, it suggests that there are two phonological stores involved in the phonological loop, an input and an output buffer, so each of which can be selectively disrupted. So that is our report all about. Thank you for listening, everyone.